Hello everyone, welcome to episode 1 of the Big Killie Question here on One Team Inertia. Every week we'll be taking a look at the big question that is on the minds of Killie fans that week. It's sort of like a podcast, but just on a very specific topic. I'm very happy to say that every week I'm going to be joined by Craig Mahood to discuss the goings-on and to give his take on the big question every week. Craig, thanks very much for coming on.
No, thanks, Adam. Thank you. It'd be good, as you said, a different question every week. So I'm sure we've all got an opinion. So it'll be good to get them out there and see what people are saying.
Absolutely. This week, as episode 1, we're going to start off with a biggie. This is going to be who was the most influential Killie player during the Steve Clarke era. Certainly, we put this out on Twitter a couple of days ago just to test the waters and see what everyone was thinking, and there was certainly a variety of opinion out there. So shortlisted it to 8 names with a couple of honourable mentions, if you will. And we're going to go through them one by one just to see what we think generally, and then we'll both give our opinion on who we think was the most influential player during the Steve Clarke era. So we're going to start off with the man in nets, Dan Bachman. Craig obviously made some key saves during the Steve Clarke years, kept us in some massive games, and really, a goalkeeper of that stature, of that, how good he was, how professional he was, it really breeds confidence throughout the whole team, especially in his back line, which, as we know, during the Steve Clarke era was so important in that defensive stability, and it all started with Dan Bachman in that push for Europe that year.
I did, yeah. As you said, a lot of talk about the defensive side of it. And although obviously Steve Clarke would have had a lot to do with that, having someone in goals with not even so much experience, but just that ability just to be able to drag people about, put people in the right positions. I think when he arrived, we hadn't really had a goalkeeper like him for a while. That someone we believed, not even so much believed in, but someone of that kind of stature that we knew could pull off saves and commanded the area and things like that. And I think since then we've again noticed how big he is, how big he was, should I say, since, because we've not had that kind of stability, I would say, since he went.
No, I think you're right. We sort of almost took it for granted just how good he was. And, we've seen with the goalkeeping fiasco so far this season that we really miss somebody like that. And I think it's really telling the fact that when it was announced that Jamie McDonald would be leaving at the end of last season, the first name on everyone's lips was Bachman. Can we get him back? Obviously, we knew that Watford were fighting relegation, and it turned out that he wasn't able to come back because it looks like he's going to get more of a look in at Watford in the Championship next season. But I think it's really telling that he's so highly regarded among Killie fans, and we've had some good goalkeepers over the years. Don't get us wrong, but it's in these times where we're struggling for fan confidence in goalkeepers that players like him, they just seem so much better than maybe what we took them for granted for at the time. Okay, on next, sticking with the defensive side of things, it's Stuart Finlay. Scored some key goals at one end of the pitch and kept them all out at the other end. Much the same with Bachman. It was all about keeping the defence tight with Steve Clarke, keeping those clean sheets and then going forward from there. And he was fantastic at both ends of the pitch. He was a leader on the park, and you can just see the passion from him, and it radiated out to all the other players. And there's no denying that he was a massive part of our success over those 2 seasons.
Yeah, and like you said, it's at both ends as well. He's when he kind of first broke in or arrived and was in the team, he was a good player, good centre half. Won his fair share in the air, and he always looked quite comfortable. And then he suddenly just went on a completely different level. Like he looked, he was winning tackles. You could hear him a lot more. It looked as if it even meant more to him. He's such a big player, like you said, especially defensively. And a couple of winners as well. The home game against Celtic obviously will stick out. Kind of last minute winner. The one at Tynecastle as well. Probably the best away day. So certainly for a long, long time. And it just showed how pivotal it was at both ends. He's kind of stepped up now to be a leader. We don't expect mistakes from him. It's one of those that makes a mistake. It's a shock, but it's such a big player for those 2 seasons.
Absolutely. Next up, moving on to the midfield, Alan Power. I think the key word for the whole period was consistency. He barely put a foot wrong for 2 straight seasons, and it was just hard graft from him, wasn't it? Allowing players like Yusuf Molenbeek, the more flair players, if you will, to really show what they were about. But it was all about him, all about Alan Power and Gary Dicker to an extent as well, doing the hard work. Basically shoring up that midfield and protecting the defence, which is why we had so much success over those 2 seasons, just keeping Finlay and Broadfoot safe. And at times he was just unplayable in a Killie shirt.
He still is. He still is one of the. He's a player that in 2 or 3 years will think, I wish we had Alan Power, because the work that he puts in, even if he has had a poor game to his standard, he still absolutely knocks his pan in. Still covers every blade of grass. There's a reason that every other team in the country hates him, especially the Old Firm. The Old Firm seem not to have taken a liking to him. But there's a reason for that, and it's because he doesn't take any nonsense. He'll pick up the odd booking. I think he's been booked every week this season, every game this season. But it's only because he's 110%. He'll go into every tackle. He'll make sure if we've got the ball, he'll very rarely give it away. If we've not got the ball, he sees it as his job to get the ball. So an absolutely fantastic football player. And as I said, it's someone that will look back in a few years and go, we could be doing with another Alan Power.
No, absolutely. And we mentioned his midfield partner there briefly, Gary Dicker. Although when we asked this on Twitter, surprisingly, nobody really said Gary Dicker at all as the most influential player under Steve Clarke. And the fact, even though he was the captain for a good spell of it, or at least half of it, his name doesn't really come up. And I think that's more to do with his work ethic. All the stuff that he does largely goes unnoticed, quite along with Alan Power as well, even to a much greater extent. But although I don't think he's really in contention for the title of most influential player, certainly worth an honourable mention, because he always puts 110% into every game, and he leads by example on the pitch.
Absolutely. He's probably been one of my favourite players of the last 10, maybe even longer than that, years, mainly because of that, because he comes in, does his work, especially in the games. He'll do what he needs to do. It really does go unnoticed. We said that earlier on this season when he was missing the Easter Road. That's a massive, massive gap. I still think he's undervalued in our support, if I'm being honest. Even taking into account the whole family situation and the fact that he's up here living on his own or living with one of the young players, comes in. He was part of the team that was putting in the safe standing, things like that. He really is a proper leader, a real kind of talisman figure. And again, it'll be someone that I think it won't be until he goes that we'll actually value him properly, because he's been, again, has the odd game where he's maybe not at his level, but in terms of consistency, again, I think he's been right up there. I think he's a far better player than the majority of our support feel. How much they can value him.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's proven by the fact that he wasn't really mentioned for most influential player, but definitely worth an honourable mention. As you say, been absolutely fantastic and just integrated himself into the whole club, which is really what you want from from your captain and someone who's been here so long. Moving on, we talked a bit about him earlier. We're going on to the X factor of the Steve Clarke years, Yusuf Mulumbu. He just had it all, didn't he? He just had the ability to win his games. He had the ability to control games, and really, we're talking this season about the importance of a number 10. It's him, isn't it? That's what he did. He provided the goals, he provided the assists, and I don't really know where it would have been without him, to be honest.
No, I agree. It's funny because he's a player that walks onto the park, walks around the park, walks off the park, and he could probably do it again for another couple of hours because it just looked so easy for him. Like you said, he had it all. If he had to put a shift in, he would still put a shift in. It wasn't. He didn't come up here and we as a fan base loved him. He knew that himself, and he wasn't one to kind of sit on what he's done in the past. He did come up, put a shift in, and like you said, he was the player that every week the team sheet it was right. Okay, something could happen here. It doesn't matter where it was. If it was at the Old Firm or home to Hamilton, he always thought we could still do something here because he is that type of player.
Yeah, it was just that one moment. Sometimes it's a moment of quality that turns games, especially in that season where we had some tight games and we just narrowly got some wins and some draws, and it was him that was the defining moment of quality, and the importance of that cannot be underestimated at all. On to number 5, Chris Burke. If Alan Power was Mr. Consistency, then so is Chris Burke, isn't he? Not quite so. I don't think he was seen as quite so vital then as he perhaps is now, but that's only because there was more quality players in the team around him during the Steve Clarke era, whereas now I think we see him more for just how important he is. But he still had that quality, he still had that ability, and was a really key part of that team for 2 seasons.
Yeah, as you said, we're pinning a lot of our game just now. We're putting a lot of pressure onto Burke. I think we need him to perform just now. Whereas, as you said, back then he would get 7.5, 8 out of 10 every week, because he would just go in, do his job, run up and down that right hand side, him and O'Donnell, and would get the odd assist, get the odd goal, but I wouldn't say it wasn't appreciated, but there was players that every week would maybe get the odd 9 or a 10 out of 10, and he was always, even if you look at the man of the match boards, he was always 3rd or 4th, every week, because he played the same game. It looked like it was the same game every week, but again, it's consistency. As you said, it's what a lot of players lack, is just being able to turn up every week and just get a 7 or 8 out of 10. We're missing that just now, and I think, as you said, it's one of those that we probably didn't appreciate him at the time, whereas now we're 2 years down the line, 36-year-old, and we're relying on him. Is where we're at.
No, absolutely. We didn't rely on him as much then, but I think he was still an integral part of the team, and every single player in that team was vital for those 2 seasons to have the success that we did. On to the next one, I think has been very popular as a choice among Killie fans. Greg Stewart, although he was only at Rugby Park for a short while. This might be a controversial opinion, but I don't think a player leaving mid-season has ever the impact of that has ever been felt as much in the past decade, perhaps, than the departure of Greg Stewart was. I think it's as simple as that. As soon as he left in that January transfer window, it was like a switch was flicked, and for the next 2 months or so, we just went through a rut of not creating chances, not scoring goals, and it did look like our season was just going to tail off. Thankfully, we got it back towards the end of that season, but it was an almost instant change from when he left. He could create so much. He could conjure up something out of absolutely nothing, and some of his play and some of his assists and goals were just absolutely superb. I don't know what you think, but he was missed so much in the second half of that season.
That first half of the season, I don't think since Eremenko maybe have I ever been out of my seat so much for a player. It was absolutely unplayable. There was a spell, I think it was around about the December time, where we were beating Livingston. I think he got both goals actually, beating Livingston 2-0 early on, and another game home to Hibs where he was involved, him and Brophy again, and just some of the things he was doing. He made Brophy a much better player as well, having that person alongside them or just behind them, playing the balls through. And as you said, I only wish he'd at least seen out the season, because even just now, he was spoke about on Sunday, Steven Gerrard saying he's finally came at the party because he was training well. He's not a player that should just be training well, and not playing. He should be playing. He should be talked about in the Scotland squad. I know we've got a lot of midfielders anyway. He should be in that conversation, because for that 6 months, or just under 6 months, he was absolutely sensational. It really, really was unplayable. Perfect partner for Brophy, and we've not had that since. Having that someone up there. I think, if I remember rightly, when I was reading, I think he got, was it 8 goals in 16 league games or something like that? Just a really, really top player. I'm sure I would take him back now. I know that it was a bit of a split cause division. I think some fans would take him back, some wouldn't. But once they started playing again, I think you would realise, it's a player that we need, and it's a player we could be doing with.
No, absolutely. And I think I would even go as far as to say that if Greg Stewart had stayed for the second half of that season, we could have challenged for second quite easily, just with how much we were creating and how much Eamon Brophy we're going to come on to in just a sec. He must have absolutely loved Greg Stewart being in the team, because he was getting so many more chances than he probably ever had in the Kilmarnock shirt, and probably ever had in his career. And he was putting them away, which was a fantastic thing. But going on to Eamon Brophy, he wasn't mentioned all too much when we asked the fans, but I don't think that his contribution over the course of the Steve Clarke era can be denied. As we say, he scored a good number of goals over the 2 seasons and really had to lead the team at times when he necessarily wasn't getting the chances, especially in the second half of that season where he didn't necessarily have that same that creative force behind him to help him get the goals.
Yeah, I think it was kind of left to kind of do it himself a lot once Greg Stewart left. But again, a lot of important goals for a guy that's 5'8", 5'9", maybe a bit taller, to play up front himself against some of the big brutes that play centre half in our league. I thought he ran the line really well. As I said, goal scoring was always going to be his thing. He was never going to not score goals, but it was more difficult for him when he didn't have someone playing beside him. But I don't think we can, again, take that for granted, because as we've seen so far, take his goals out of the team, and there's not many that are going to kind of step up. There's not many that are going to provide. And I think, again, a player that Steve Clarke probably got the best out of, and I don't think we've quite seen it since then, but we still can't underappreciate the work that he puts in and the goals that he still does come up with, even though he doesn't have someone there to help him quite as much.
Absolutely. And on to his strike partner for one season, saving the best for last, obviously has to be the legend that is Chris Boyd, top scorer in Steve Clarke's first season. He just absolutely reinvigorated Chris Boyd, and you could say that he was the man. His goals, he started it all off for us at the end of the day, getting to Europe, and we owe a big part of our success in that second season, finishing third to Chris Boyd the season before.
Yeah, and obviously, as you said, absolute club legend, and it did look as if maybe a year or two before that his time was up, in terms of he wasn't going to play much and wasn't fit enough and wasn't going to be included, and just seemed like a new lease of life that he got. It came to substitutions when he was coming on, and you could tell he was just up for it all the time. And I don't know if that was Clarke giving him a bit of freedom, because he was then able to go and do his other things and other things outside of Kilmarnock. But it did look a completely different player. As you said, the top scorer of the first season. It probably, I wouldn't say he could probably still get a game now, but just having that person on the bench, other defenders looking across and thinking, we've done all right for 60 minutes, but now here comes Chris Boyd. What we would do for his goals again.
No, absolutely. And I think you'd say that about almost every player there this season. We're really needing them back. So that is myself and Craig's thoughts on those players. We'll take a quick look at what your responses were on Twitter. A lot of love for Greg Stewart on Twitter, actually. Gordon Bell saying we'll never know if him and Brophy would have hit it off all season, but the first few months that he was there suggested it would have been very special if he'd stayed. Ali Niven even went as far as to say those 6 months had us believing we could compete for the league and match and beat any team in the division. So very high praise there. Jordan, he says Dan Bachman, he made all the important saves and was a key reason why we finished third. A lot of love for Alan Power and for Chris Burke, just about the consistency that they showed week in, week out. Yusuf Malumbu, he actually replied to a tweet, so he's got to mention his name. He said everything from work ethic to ability. He was a machine, and his never say die attitude rubbed off on everyone else in the team. So a lot of wide variety there about who they thought was the most influential player in the Steve Clarke year. But Craig, time for the moment of truth. Who is your choice?
I think, as you've said, there are 8 players all mentioned, and we've probably had the same starting 11 most weeks. So that just goes to show that it wasn't just a one-man team. It was more of a team thing rather than one player. If he'd stayed that full season, Greg Stewart would be up there because, as I said, that first 5 months was special. Singing things like "We Shall Not Be Moved" in December, going top of the league. Like we'll not see that again. Probably a bit for a long time. But in terms of overall consistency for that season, and I texted my brothers this morning asking what they thought, try and give a bit of inspiration. And Derek and Ryan both said, and I'm going to go with him as well, has to be Alan Power. I think, much like I was saying for Chris Burke, he was always up there. I think he got player of the season, actually. That season we were third. If he wasn't man of the match, he was the runner-up every week. It's a player that we'll miss. And I know you may still be here for a little time yet, but I think the work that he puts in, the work that he did put in, especially that season, Gary Dicker sitting in front and Power covering the left back, covering the right back, and providing Malumbu, providing Greg Stewart, Jones, all these players the opportunity to get forward. I think we couldn't have done that and let those players up front flourish the way they did if we didn't have Alan Power. So I would say he was the most influential.
No, a very, very worthy choice there. You just reminded me there before I go into mine. The final honourable mention of the day was actually going to be Jordan Jones. I know that might be a bit controversial among Killie fans at the minute, but I don't think there's any denying that in certain games when we were maybe struggling or just we didn't have that spark, he was always going to be the one that provided it. You could always rely on him doing something to get the fans excited, although the end product wasn't there the majority of the time. The fact that he was always willing to go past players and just it made it exciting most games. We talked about when you had Malumbu on the team sheet, you knew that something was going to happen. It was the same with Jordan Jones. You knew exactly what kind of performance you were going to get. I know his end product isn't the best, but just the fact that he was able to constantly go past players, and there were times in those 2 seasons where he absolutely humiliated fullbacks to the extent that they had to go off at half time. I think that happened once or twice. But yeah, an honourable mention for him, but I don't think he'd really come anywhere near the most influential. But in terms of my pick, just like you, I'm going to say firstly that it was a team effort. Every player in that team over those 2 seasons was crucial to the success that we eventually achieved. And I think it's unfair that we had to pick one. But if I did, and with an honourable mention like you to Greg Stewart and to Alan Power as well, I'm going to have to go with Stuart Finlay. As I said earlier, he was key at both ends of the pitch. He got some vital goals, including that one at home against Celtic and the one at Hearts as well, which I think really almost secured our European place, if not in theory, but just in terms of the feeling at the end of that game and coming away from that game at Tynecastle that day was one that I don't think I'll ever forget for a very long time.
That was special,
and it was him that caused that, and just defensively as well. Defending strongly was so much the mantra under Steve Clarke, and he was really the one to lead that alongside Broadfoot. And when you've got Broadfoot as your central defensive partner, you've got to be on top of your game every single match day. So Stuart Finlay for me, but shout out to everyone else that was on that list, because they all played a part. Even the ones that weren't on the list, everybody in that team, in those teams, even players like Greg Taylor that we haven't even mentioned at all. Everybody played their part. Kirk Broadfoot and everyone else, they all played a part in what was the ultimate success of that team. But it's Alan Power for you, Stuart Finlay for me. I think that'll do very nicely for the first episode of the Big Killie Question. Certainly a controversial one to get us started, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more to come. So thanks, Craig, for joining me for this. You find Craig on Twitter at Craig Mahood, very simply, and make sure you follow us on Twitter as well at One Team Ayrshire. We're going to have loads more like this every week. You can let us know what questions you want us to chat about and discuss down in the comments below, and we'll be sure to get to them at some point. But it's certainly going to be a nice wee podcast every week to talk about specific questions and ideas. So thanks very much, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Cheers.